Hello, everyone. My name is Andy Krenz, and I'm the Director of Education here at Thoughtexchange. Really pleased to have you all joining us today as we discuss digital equity in the age of COVID. This session is the second session in our Equity in Education series. And these sessions are going to be running every couple of weeks for the foreseeable future as we lean into courageous conversations, as we mine for and discover and extract the collective intelligence of the group, our network here at Thoughtexchange of educational leaders across the continent. And we deliver back. The mission unequivocally is to deliver back that intelligence to you as learning in real time. One of the things that we can bring to this conversation as a company here at Thoughtexchange is the network of educational leaders across the country. And so it's a really powerful thing to be able to do, to come together virtually across the barriers that exist to lean into conversations like this one. I shared in the last session that prior to becoming an employee at Thoughtexchange, I was a personal fitness trainer. And one of the things that I asked of my clients in that role was, which exercises do you hate most? And when behind those answers to those questions was always an undeveloped muscle group. And so when we removed the barriers, when we removed the distractions, when we removed the excuses, and we were able to focus intentionally on the muscle groups that were undeveloped, we collectively sort of became comfortable being uncomfortable and enabled I was able to enable my clients to become more healthy. And what we find ourselves in this conversation is with COVID-19, a dramatic reset button has been pressed. A number of distractions have been removed. A number of excuses have been laid bare. There's been a number of things that have become very clear around some of the muscle groups that are undeveloped among our educational leaders across the continent. And we have the opportunity to drill into one of those today, which is, of course, the conversation on digital equity. I want to just name a couple of things before I pass it over to our host for today. As a white male in a position of authority, and as a representative of a company that finds ourselves at the confluence of a number of critical conversations that have dramatic implications on the equity work that we've become part of, we find ourselves in a place with undeveloped muscles. And so as willing workers in endeavoring to build those muscles, and as co-conspirators together with our network, just want to name that and be okay and actually invite the discomfort that comes with these conversations. So super pleased to be able to do this and facilitate this conversation today. We are honored as part of that work and that ability to sort of go after those uncomfortable exercises, to have Dr. Dennis Carpenter to join us as a Thoughtexchange, to come on the Thoughtexchange team and sort of lock arms with us as we build capacity and build muscle both internally and myself and my colleagues personally, and also wear this same effort externally with our network of educational leaders. Dr. Carpenter, who I'll pass it over to in a second, will take us through the hour we're going to spend together. Logistically, we have a number of presenters going to give short, power-packed nuggets of wisdom that will hopefully challenge us and inspire us and push us into these courageous conversations. And then we're going to crowdsource the intelligence of the group and actually give you a right to your voice in guiding the time that we have to spend together using the Thoughtexchange platform to do so. At the end, we'll bring you back together and inform you about some of the other pieces that are coming in the days and weeks ahead, so that collectively as a team, we can actually lean into this discomfort and this work going forward. Now, again, one of the things that I want to name is that some of us are coming to this conversation somewhat new, and some of us are not coming. We do not have undeveloped muscles, and we have actually very strong muscles, and we're here to actually be inspired and be challenged and wear all of those things at the same time, despite the discomfort there. Dr. Carpenter, it's my honor to pass the floor to you. Dr. Carpenter has a wealth of experience in a number of different offices in education, in public education, and has experienced firsthand the highs and lows of being an equity champion, and is uniquely then positioned to actually guide us through the hour that we have together and the days and weeks ahead. Dr. Carpenter, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy, and thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon during this lunch hour in many places. Take a journey with me. You're a school superintendent, a school district leader. You're walking down a sidewalk. It's a normal sidewalk. Cross signs are there, everything is there. Small intersections, just 2-lane roads. Then you get to the main intersection. There is no crossing sign. There is no stop sign. There is no red light. There is no median, and it's busy. It's super busy at this intersection. And as a school superintendent, you must get across. In this busy intersection, there is morality, there's courage, there's integrity, there's truth, there are lies, there's right, there's wrong, there's special interests, there's genuine care, and you have to cross. But you can only use one thing or one part of your psyche or your intellect to get across. Thoughtexchange is all about questions. So I want you to think about that one question that might help you get across. And what if that intersection was the pandemic as it relates to COVID-19 and the decisions you have to make for your school district and ultimately for your staffs, for your communities, and for your children? So you're packing this one question to help you get across. I don't know what yours might be, but I can tell you as a former superintendent what mine would be. My question would be, considering Ingera. For those who do not know, the Maasai tribe centuries ago were known in Kenya and across Africa as the most fierce and the most intelligent warriors on that continent and in the world. And anytime they met each other and prepared to go into battle, they posed the question, considering Ingera. And that question is simply, and how are the children? That question has persisted over time, and it's still the customary greeting in their tribal areas today. And how are the children? And it did not matter what was on their agenda. If the response was not, the children are okay, they paused. They paused at that busy intersection. They stopped what they were doing and they strategized to figure it out. They strategized to get it right, to make certain before they went into battle, the children were okay. That's where we are now. We're at this busy intersection, digital inequity, COVID-19, to close or to open. And it's busy at this intersection. If I was still sitting in that seat with you, that would be the question I would utilize to get me across. And how are the children? So today we unpack this notion of how are our children in the midst of this pandemic? Are they okay? And if not, why? And what can we do? COVID did not create inequities, but COVID sure as hell magnified inequities that were already in our systems and in our communities, of which schools are just a small microcosm. And we're excited today to have with us some of the best in the business who are doing the work of creating digital equity, during such a unique time in the history of our country's schools, schools across the world, across our continent. Today, we're going to hear from Dr. Adam Phyall. Dr. Phyall is the Director of Technology and Media Services in the Newton County School District in Georgia. We're also going to hear from Superintendent Dr. Mark Bedell, the Kansas City Public Schools System, Kansas City, Missouri. These are gentlemen who have stood on behalf of young people and the promise that schools can afford them by providing access and opportunity, even in the midst of pandemic. So we are going to hear from them over the course of the next several minutes. We are going to learn with them, and we're going to build community around something that we know is important for everyone on the line. We'll have an exchange. We'll bring them back. We'll have a panel discussion. Thank you for being here. And I want you to process over the course of the next hour this busy intersection that we all stand in front of. And in many cases, with little to no guidance, stop signs, street signs, crossing signs, none of that. But we have to get across. And I submit to you that together, as educators who've dedicated our lives to this work, we will get across. When things were somewhat normal and we got into our patterns of operating as school leaders, it afforded us a luxury to get away from that idealistic spirit that placed us all in our roles as educators. And instead of staying far removed from that idealistic spirit that you can make things better, in the midst of the current reality, I will submit that it's time to go back to that idealistic spirit, that we can do what's right and we can get across. I'm excited to be with you all today. I'm super excited to be hosting today's event, and we're going to go ahead and kick it off and get it started with Dr. Adam Phyall, Newton County Schools. Give it up for Dr. Phyall.
Thank you, Dr. Carpenter, for that. I'm really excited to be here during this time. And as you mentioned, the pandemic, this whole COVID time has really brought out a lot of things that we all are aware of. You know, we all have things in common. And the things that we really have in common are our differences. And in education, we do a really great job of telling people we're doing the right things. We do. For example, one-to-one. Everyone's saying they're doing one-to-one to provide equitable access to students. But let's be honest with ourselves. One-to-one is not about equity. One-to-one is about providing equal access. In its essence, what one-to-one is simple, it's easy. It's a math problem. You have X number of students, you provide X number of students, X number of devices. That's one-to-one. That is where a lot of people fall short of this promise of equity, because equity is really providing students what they need, regardless of the device, regardless of where they live, regardless of their background. So we have to provide the students what they need. And when we look at this pandemic, in my district, we weren't one-to-one prior to this. So we were doing our best to provide access to our students who need it, the devices that they need. But we had some bad actors who wanted to disrupt this system because they felt as though it was more important for their student to be in the building than at home. So they went out and tried to sabotage the same process by requesting things that they didn't need. Because it wasn't about equity, it was about my needs, my voice is not being heard. So this whole process, this pandemic, has really put a magnifying lens on some of these individuals out there who are feeling that somehow or another they're being infringed upon, their rights aren't being given to them. And it's not about the students, it's not about the kids. And that's that process that we have been trying to fight to get people to understand in education. You have to make it about our students. So when I talk about digital equity in this setting or any other environment, it's no longer time to talk. It's time to act. ACT. And in education, yeah, we love our acronyms. So ACT actually stands for something for me. Access, connectivity, and task. Once again, that's access, connectivity, and task. And when I look at access, it's are our students given the correct devices, the correct materials to do what they need to do? Yeah, you gave every kid a Chromebook, but guess what? I'm a student and I don't need a Chromebook. I need a full-on PC to do the work I need to do. I need a MacBook. I need an iPad. Are you giving the student what they need to achieve their task? When you're talking about our special education students, are you giving them what they need? Are you giving every kid the same thing to say you check the box off on your paper? And when you talk about connectivity, it's no longer about just getting access to the internet. What this has proven, this whole COVID situation, now that students are Zooming, are uploading content, it's not about just getting connected to the internet. It's about having high-speed data connections. It's about, are they able to do what they need to do wherever they are? You have households now where you have 5 and 6 kids in a home. One simple hotspot, that's not going to cut it. So you have some students that are getting left behind who are not able to get the same learning, the same teaching that their peers are because they don't have the connectivity that they need. And this is one of those things that we look at. It's not even affecting your brown and black kids. It's not affecting your poor kids. You have folks in rural areas who don't have the connectivity they need. They don't have the bandwidth they need. So it's larger than that. And when you start talking about task, which is that last piece, are our students given the time, given the task that they need? Are they forced to do drill and kill assignments? One thing that I like to mention is when you look at something like IKEA, you get something you put together, you have the parts and you follow those directions. Are our students just following directions, or are they giving the skills? Are they given the task where they can hack it, if you will? Are they given that task where they can figure out and determine and create their own content? And that's where we're dropping the ball in a lot of our students. A lot of our students of color are given those same opportunities. Research shows us that. Those students are given those drill and kill activities and not given those opportunities to expand their thinking, to create their own opportunities. So that is what I challenge everyone listening to me: create that act in your space. Give them the access they need, give them the connectivity they need, and provide them the opportunities to create those tasks that they want to create. It's all about voice and choice, ladies and gentlemen.
Voice and choice. It's all about voice and choice. Powerful, powerful takeaway. Thank you, Dr. Phyall. Act, access, connectivity, and task. Are we providing that in the age of COVID? Powerful and something to think about. Up next, we have Superintendent Extraordinaire. It's an honor for me to call this man a friend in the work that he's doing in a very, very difficult space, continuing to make progress, now sustained over time. Dr. Mark Bedell.
Thank you, Dr. Carpenter, Dr. Phyall. Appreciate your comments, and employees of Thoughtexchange, a company that we do partner with. It's an honor to be here and to talk to you all about how this is working out in the Kansas City Public School District. I've been here now, I'm in year 5, which is kind of crazy because we have not had superintendents to last longer than 2 years on average. I think there's been a couple that have been here 4 years or so over the last 30 years. So we've been able to get a lot of work done. And, the thing that frustrates me around this conversation is everybody talks about equity, right? And the thing that I've said to our state commissioner and many other educators is don't allow for it to become another buzzword in education. Because in education, we go through these different phases, whether it's professional learning communities, whether it's rigor, right? We never really ever defined what rigor is. There's no common definition for rigor. So it's kind of left open for people to insert a tremendous amount of subjectivity. And sometimes I think that in education, we get excited about something because it's what's hot and then we move on. We have to be careful of that, because with equity, I can also see how SEL, which is social emotional learning, is beginning to become that next big buzzword that begins to phase out equity. And we've never even truly addressed the inequities that are built into this system. And so people have to be careful of that. And so for me, when I think about the work that we've been doing, and honestly, the exposure that COVID revealed, there's a superintendent on here listening right now, Dr. Anthony Lewis, and he's the first African-American superintendent over in the Lawrence Public School District. But he can also attest to what we had experienced here in the Kansas City area, where we had already been talking about all of this equity work the second I arrived. One of the things we learned right off the beginning is we were a one-to-one school district back in 2015, but we never accounted for the 70% or so of families that didn't have internet connectivity at home. And it took for me to walk to a school one day because I wanted to watch how they offloaded on school buses and what were their procedures. And there's a kid sitting on the steps of one of our high schools. I said, "What are you doing out here?" And the kid said, "I have to work. And then by the time I get out of work, the libraries are closed. I don't have internet at home, but the only way that I can do my homework is on this device. So I have to get up early, no matter how cold it is or wet it is, and I have to sit on the porch or I have to go somewhere in front of my school in order to get my work done." Because in doing that, we had removed textbooks and we had put all of that online. So good intentions, but poor execution resulted in us having to figure out how are we going to fix this. And that resulted in us partnering with the Sprint 1 Million program. We were one of the first districts to partner with them to provide those hotspots for every single one of our high schoolers that needed it, but couldn't afford it. So fast forward now to the pandemic, and we are a school district now that has devices for every single one of our students. We also have unlimited hotspots for every single one of our students. And that is basically equality, right? We're just doing what we're supposed to be doing. The equitable part is to then say, how do I look at my funding mechanism? How do I look at data? How do I look at the structures that have been designed in certain neighborhoods by zip code to put those schools at a disadvantage, and then build out a tiered support model that provides more resources to help control for those variables that are beyond the control of those staff members in those schools. So if that means to give more support to help close academic gaps, but to also close social and emotional gaps, that's what we're going to do. And so that requires then that you have to have a board that's willing to support you. They have to be willing to adopt an equity policy, number one. And then number two, back up that equity policy by going into your budget to support these schools in the manner that they need to be supported. So where are we now in the midst of all of this? We have an excellent data tracking mechanism. We have an ideal of what percentage of our kids are logging in every day who aren't. We know where you are. We are working diligently to give additional supports to those students right now that are struggling. We're building out learning centers that we're going to put in place because we will not have kids back in at full scale. We don't know when we're going to get them back in at full scale, given the pandemic. You can't allow for these kids to fall further behind and then they fall into your tier 4 mode where they're 3 or years behind or more because we aren't doing what we need to do. So I've been fully committed to not committing educational malpractice. And educational malpractice is, you know that you have some issues in your system, but you allow for the pandemic to overshadow that. And you kind of appear that right now I'm in a helpless situation. We've taken a whole different approach to how we're going to provide those additional supports. And so the last thing I'll say with my last minute that I have is, what are we going to do about all of these gaps that are going to emerge as a result of this pandemic? And for us, I shared with my board last night, and it's live stream, so anybody can listen to this. I need for you all to allow and give me the support to be as innovative as I need to be, because I'm never going back to this model that we're in right now. This model has been built on structural racist tenets. It has been built by design to keep urban school district students and communities shut out of whatever respective city you're in, out of the dream. And we will no longer allow for that to happen. We will dismantle, We will rebuild and we will redesign this system to be more responsive to the community that I have to serve. And it's going to start off with looking at a different calendar outside of the ones that we have utilized for the last 30 to 40 years. That's my next phase of engagement with our community. And then that will be the foundation that will allow for us to innovate in the way that we need to innovate and to truly apply that equity lens in everything that we do to give these kids a fair shot at the Kansas City dream.
Dr. Bedell, dismantle, rebuild, and redesign. And when I hear the conversation as it relates to everyone having a device and one-to-one being equal but not equitable, that's so powerful. I'm reflecting right here, because when we do this work, and I'm going to turn it over to Andy to launch this exchange, you don't get a do-over. And one of the things I reflected on as I reflect on my 7+ years as a school superintendent, some of the biggest mistakes I ever made, they happened when I tried to use a technical solution to solve an adaptive problem. It's when I tried to use a technical solution to solve an adaptive problem. Leadership is about second order change. It's about adaptive leadership, and everything cannot be technical. Thank you, Dr. Bedell. Thank you, Dr. Phyall. Andy, let's launch an exchange.
Certainly. So I'm going to share my screen in a 10 seconds here, and I'm just going to explain what we're going to do there. You're going to have a chance to answer an open-ended question, which is, what areas, thoughts, questions do you have for our presenters to drill deeper into? We're going to facilitate a conversation, giving each of you the opportunity to share a thought, and then we're going to prioritize those thoughts in real time using our platform. As I share my screen, there's 2 ways to join the exchange. You can open up a personal device and point it at the QR code that I've just put up. Everyone seeing a QR code? Mm-hmm. You can point a camera at the QR code and get a link that way. We've also popped the link to this exchange into the chat. And every exchange is a 3-step process. In the first step, you share your responses to the open-ended question. In the second step, you are going to consider and rate the thoughts of others in this conversation. You're going to make value judgments based on what resonates with you on a 5-star scale. If something resonates with you, please give it a 4s and 5s. If it doesn't resonate with you, feel free to give it 1s and 2s. I want to highlight something, that you're not making value judgments on people, but you are making value judgments on perspectives. And through that process together, we're going to align on the issues and initiatives and discussion points that we want to spend the remainder of our time with today. I want to say one more thing before I close my mouth and resist the temptation to talk all the way through this moment. And that's to be courageous. Be courageous and forthcoming and vulnerable in both the responses you have to what's been presented and questions that you need answered today. Because we have the intelligence in the room, both sitting out there across the continent and on the panelist docket here. So I'll turn it over. We'll have a couple moments of quiet as you're all participating and sharing the thoughts that you have in response to what you've just heard. I've closed the exchange, and the top thought in this exchange, as we've just prioritized it, is this one: what can principals do now? Many of these conferences seem to talk about why the topic of equity is important, but not enough on how. Dr. Carpenter, what's interesting about how that rose to the top, and you take it from here? I will continue to show the top thoughts as the conversation moves.
Absolutely. What can principals do now? Many of these conferences seem to talk about why the topic of equity is important, but not enough on the how. We've been rewarded, we've been elevated in the field of education because of what problem we can fix and how quickly we can fix that problem. That's been our reward structure. But oftentimes the largest dilemmas that face us in the field remain untackled. So when you think about a more equitable and a more just system for kids who come from situations that are oppressed and marginalized in a place called school, we haven't solved for that. That's because the answer to the problem does not reside in our existing wheelhouse. It requires us to build some muscle and some stamina that we never built before. I had a superintendent tell me the other day, we heard from our students, we elevated their voices, and these inequities still persist in our district, but we have policies. We have procedures that should protect us from discrimination in these acts in our district. So my question is, why are these policies not being utilized to support our students? It's because it's an adaptive issue. And having a policy in and of itself will not solve for this issue. So we have to do the messy work of self-examination, examining our systems and asking the why over and over again at a clear cadence. So what can principals do right now? They can elevate conversations in their district, in their school. They can elevate the voices of some of their most vulnerable students. They can try to find ways to elevate the voices of parents who have not been heard before. One school district shared the other day that we've been working on our reentry plan. And then when we posed a question to our families, we realized that what was most important to us as a district was not what was most important to them. So how do we start crowdsourcing the intelligence of the people in our organization in a way that might give us a more equitable approach to what we're doing? Great question. Conversation. It begins and ends with the right conversations. What other thoughts are emerging? Andy?
So between these top three, we have student voice becoming a very prevalent theme among this. I'm curious for our panelists to speak either to this first one about principles or drilling into some of these next thoughts about student voice and transformational change. Back over to you, Dennis. You can direct the conversation as you like.
Dr. Phyall, in the world of technology and digital equity, how are you all utilizing student voice, and in what ways are you elevating the voices of students in this process?
The biggest thing is to really realize that students are a partner in this process, because when we look at what we're doing in education, you do not want to be teaching to these students, because at the end of the day, our buildings of our institutions, they are in their communities. This is something a lot of your staff will come and go. That building will still be there. That the education that has been done to our students will be something that's a lasting impact. So we really have started the process of making sure the students have a seat at the table. And in some cases, it's not even about the table. It's about kicking that table over and building something with our students. Because oftentimes we want them to conform to our norms. In some cases, we've looked at some of our different principal groups or superintendents groups that we get in. Are they a true representation of your student population? Because we talk about earlier, this one-to-one initiative and things of that nature. We had asked ourselves, have we had our students actually tell us what they wanted? Or is this something that we are keeping up with another district because they have devices, because we feel we got to have these devices? Have we even talked to our kids and say, do you want these devices? What do you want to learn with the devices? What do you even like what we have for you? So really making sure that our students feel as though that they are a valuable member of our community and having those conversations so they have that buy-in. Because if you are doing things to them, there's no buy-in. They don't care about a device at the end of the day. They're going to move on and do something else. So it's really making sure that they understand that this is a partnership. They're a part of this, and we're growing and building something together. So we've really looked at bringing in all of our students. So not just your top tier students, quote unquote, your students from certain parents that want them to have this as that thing that they can put on their college transcripts. Bringing in all of our students, bring some of our students who had discipline issues, because maybe they've had some discipline issues because they haven't had their voices heard. So really ensuring that you can bring those students in, and it doesn't have to be just be the superintendent that does this. It could be your departments of technology. It could be your curriculum department that has their own subset of students that they bring in and talk to, because you want to make sure that you're listening to listen to these streets, if you will. Listen to these kids that are out here who are doing these things. You got to have your ear to the ground and understand what they want so you can support what they need.
Absolutely. Hearing their voices, keeping your ear to where they are. Absolutely. Dr. Bedell, 5 years, you've been pretty transformative, and you talked about more transformation that's on the horizon. How are you elevating student voice to get these results?
So honestly, we engage our students in a number of our initiatives, whether it's me as a superintendent going directly to our schools and doing brown bag lunches or speaking to our students in assemblies. I do that frequently, and I talk to them about the direction we want to head in. We seek input from our students. We assembled, a student district advisory committee that gets to come in and they get to report out to us and really just help us shape where we're going. And so we've been very intentional engaging our students. And even as we think about this transformative work we're going to be doing around the calendar, I've already started engaging students on what are your thoughts about this type of calendar? How do you think this could benefit you? We haven't even gone out and rolled this out yet to the community, but some of our students have already weighed in on whether they feel it would benefit them or not. And so you just don't want to be in a situation where you're always having things being done to you. And I think that that's an experience that we've had as a school system from a legislative standpoint, many things being done to us, many experiments being done to us through a legislation. I don't want to be, as a leader, a person that perpetuates those types of practices by not engaging our students in whatever we're going to do, because the buy-in's got to come from them. And the other thing that we've done here in our school district is we encourage our students to speak out against things that they don't think are fair or will work for them, and including my own children. And so what that means is if you need to come and you need to protest, we tell you what time the board meeting is and where the address is, and we want you to have voice. So we're really teaching our kids to become future leaders, to be the generation that will lead us in helping to make this country a much better place and ultimately eliminating the inequities that are inherently built into the system.
Absolutely.
Dr. Bedell, if I can, I appreciate that and I commend you for that, because very often you have leaders who don't want to have their students come into the school board meetings unless they have given them an award for something. So it's very important that they understand that they have a right. They're a community member. They're in the school system. When you have that open comment section or whatever the case may be, if there's something wrong with that in their school system that they want to have their voices heard, they can come in there just like their parent can, just like the guy who owns the corner store, whatever that case may be. They can come in there and have their voices heard. And it's so empowering to hear a superintendent say that. And I encourage the rest of if there's other superintendents listening, empower your students to do that. Because we just came off this highly contested election. We want our students to become advocates for their own things at the local level. It starts at the school. If they're taking care of what's happening in their school level, they're going to take it at their local legislative level, and they're going to take it all the way to the state level. We have to empower them early and often.
So Dr. Phyall, Dr. Carpenter, if I could just say this, I'm sorry, but like my daughter was a senior last year, and I remember having to make the announcement that they will not have a prom. Mm-hmm. They will not get their senior activities. They will not be able to graduate. And I remember her breaking down and crying in the kitchen. And I was just helpless about it because I understood how these kids felt. She was the one that shared with me that, some folks are talking about coming up to the district to protest. And I said, listen, I want you all to do that. I hope that we have given you the confidence to have that voice and to know that nobody's going to retaliate against you because you're coming up expressing your concern. I'm going to be very clear with you. You're more than welcome. You can come. Hey, it's probably not going to change much, but I want you guys to come up there because I want you to feel that that's what we've taught you all to do. So that's just my belief in how we should be running and how we should be empowering our students.
But what ended up happening with graduation, Dr. Bedell?
It ended up being beautiful. It just wasn't in a traditional way. We were able to give them as real of a commencement as possible, where parents were able to come in. in small groups. We did 10 students to 12 students at a time. We recorded it. They got to shake the hands. They got they got to pound us, whatever. They got their diplomas. They got to take their senior pictures, turn their tassel, and then we pieced it all together. And Miss Kelly Wachu, who's on here, put together a beautiful presentation that was aired on our public channel that we partner with here locally.
Wow. Yes, it begins and ends with the right conversation. As leaders, we get to decide the conversation and shape the conversation. If I can add anything to that before we move into the next thought, I will only say that it's important to stay ahead of the conversation because are participating in the conversation because it's happening anyway. It's happening amongst your students and it's happening in your communities. And Thoughtexchange allows for that opportunity to establish a cadence and stay involved in those conversations. Next thought, how do we support students who disengage in the online learning experience and or the barriers are such that they cannot participate? First wave data shows high numbers of kids simply disengage from their learning, their teachers, and their schools. Dr. Bedell, what are you seeing and how do you combat said notion?
We're seeing very similar trends, just like every other district. I was just on this morning with superintendents from the Council for Great City Schools, and we share a lot of this data. As a school district right now, we're looking at anywhere from 82 to 84% of a contact rate. It's a lot higher at our elementary level. When you break down the data, it's probably over a little bit around over 85%. And then at our high school and secondary levels, it just drops. And so what we're doing right now is we're working with our student support division. We're going out, we're making home visits. We have pictures of people in driveways helping to support our kids. The bigger issue that we're running into is we have a high population of English language learners. And that has been very difficult because, just being able to help those families understand how to utilize the technology, how to navigate through, that has been a tough push for us. But then the other thing that we're doing right now is we're looking at these learning centers. So if you go to our website, www.kcpublicschools.org, and you pull up our presentation from last night on our board monitoring, we have several slides in there around these learning centers that we're building out right now. And they won't be big, but we believe that we can probably serve anywhere from 200 to 350 kids that really need some intensive support. And those are going to be the kids that we will target. This is not a situation where everybody's going to, there's going to be parents saying, why not my kid? And we're saying, listen, based on the data, based on the attendance rates, these kids are going to be the ones right now that there will be no way that they can return if we don't intervene. And so that's kind of how we're working on addressing some of that data right now, Dr. Carpenter.
Absolutely. So that kind of brings up one of the next top thoughts. How do you support privileged parents? Let me get back to the thought. How do you support privileged parents' understanding of equity and it not being equality? There's a superintendent in the news the other day, strong colleague in the work of equity, receiving death threats because he was prioritizing the return of students based on the students with the most need. So privileged parents understanding equity not being equality. How do you deal with that and grapple with that, Dr. Bedell?
Being very honest with them. Look, if people want to Google how I've addressed equity and how I have talked about inequities in Kansas City, there is enough literature out there for everybody to truly understand my position on this. When I got here in 2016, it just took me a few weeks to realize how racially divided this city was. There is a divider line in this city, which is called the Truce Divider Line, east and west of Truce. And it tells a whole different story when you're on the east of Truce, which is the vast majority of the school district that I serve. And so I remember the date. I think it was November 2nd, 2016. I was in the wealthy part of the community in the Waldo and Brookside area at my last listening and learning tour, and we had over 200 people who showed up. And I said, you know, before we can even get into this conversation, let's address the elephant in the room. Let's talk about how racially oppressed, marginalized, and divided this city is. And if we can't address having that conversation, we cannot move this system forward. And people were very offended by it. They were very offended by the conversation. But then you have to also be equipped as a leader to have already done your homework. If you don't understand the history of your city, if you haven't read the books that have been written on your city, you can't go out here having those kind of conversations. You will get your hand cut off, just like Luke Skywalker did when he tried to go and fight and he wasn't ready. And so at the end of the day, I have taken, and I've always supported my concern around the inequities with literature. So then when it was time for me to roll out my tiered model, I didn't get a lot of pushback. You know, the most pushback I got back was from some principals who said, how come that school is getting this and I'm not getting that? And this is what I said to those principals. Anybody that's complaining about what this school is getting, we can swap. You can go over there and we can swap that principal with you. That ended that conversation.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Dr. Phyall, next question for you that's coming up in the chat. How do we make remote learning more equitable in the short term right now? And what's the most innovative thing you've done around access and task as it relates to technology? Dr. Phyall.
Well, one thing that this pandemic has given us the opportunity to do, and we talk about these buzzwords and terms. You know, we say we're going to reimagine education, and it's not a lot of reimagination going on. It's trying to say, how can we use technology to do what we did before in a lot of these circumstances and cases. And here in this district that I'm in now, we are suburban, urban, rural. We have a little bit of all of those things within here. And they have pockets that have great access, and there's some without great access. And to Dr. Bedell's point, we have some things here where they don't like using racial terms. You know, we'll split things up and we'll say the east side and the west side. You know, that's kind of how we split it up. It's everyone knows what we're talking about, but we don't say it. We'll say there's a certain population who doesn't believe in masks. There's a population who does. You know, all those things, because we won't talk about the elephant in the room, because ultimately we haven't worked that muscle yet to be able to utilize it. You know, to your point, you know, we don't want to lose our hands when we have those conversations. And that's kind of going back to how we had some parents try to kind of sabotage our learning plan. We weren't able to have enough hotspots for every kid, but we said, hey, we should have enough based on our need. Because we did the data, we realized which families would need it. But we had some parents who wanted all the schools to go back 100% day one. And so it was a Facebook group that got started with some folks, and they were like, go to the school and demand a hotspot. They got to give it to you. Now, these are parents who didn't need it, but they knew if they went and requested it, they were going to try to take it and basically deplete our inventory. So in their minds, they thought we'd be forced to go back. But guess what? We figured out some other ways. So we found some other partners. So Spectrum, one of our internet service providers, they started a plan where we could provide in-home access to some families. So, and that was better than a hotspot, because now we're connecting internet access into the home. And now the whole family can be connected to the internet. And it was costing us less than it would cost us for a hotspot with that program. We did a 3-tiered model. So we do have some students who are face-to-face in our district. And then we also have the synchronous, asynchronous kind of Zoom meetings. But then we also set up self-paced. And what we found out with the self-paced learning, a lot of the students that are doing that are saying, hell, I don't want to go back to regular school. This works for me. I mean, we've had some students who have various family issues where ultimately they're serving as parent for their younger siblings. So self-paced works perfectly for them. We have some folks that said, you know what, I don't like my teacher, I don't like my principal, but guess what? I can do this self-paced and I can learn just as good. And we're even looking at opportunities to expand this to make it where when we go back to quote unquote normal, students will be able to pick and choose which classes are self-paced and which ones are face-to-face. So we're doing that, and then we're putting, of course, whatever a lot of other districts are doing, putting up these mobile areas where students can access the internet, working with our local businesses that are available. Some of our subdivisions in our lower income areas say, hey, the community center, we're going to put a Wi-Fi ranger out here. And so in the community center, they'll be able to access the internet in the quote unquote clubhouse area, if you will, or in the commons areas in the subdivision or in the apartment complex. So really looking at ways to give more students access, but anytime, anywhere, even from our support system. I've tiered my team, my technology team, to be able to provide support until like 9 o'clock at night based on email support. So we're flexing out time with people, because if I'm getting off work at 7 and I can help my kid at 7, I need help then. I can't wait till the next day when you're on the clock. So we have some people who are answering emails after hours and doing time logs. So really being flexible and figuring out new ways to solve these current problems that we're facing today.
Wow. Thank you, gentlemen. What a power-packed hour. Thank you for all you're doing, even in the midst of pandemic, to ensure that we remain the promised land. Thank you for everything you're doing. Give it up, turn it over to Andy to close us out.
Yeah, I just want to pull on a couple of quick threads here, and then we'll send you on your way rejoicing here at the top of the hour. The idea, a couple of ideas that I'm hearing here is, and I just want to name, is that the ability to do what we're doing here today, to give people a right to their voice, to ask them to inform critical issues and respond to questions on issues and initiatives that affect them, is in the power of your hands, actually. You talked about SEL, Dr. Bedell. You talked about graduation. I was amazed as a Thoughtexchange liaison how many districts were not asking their students how they felt about graduation in spring of last year and just making decisions on their behalf. And those that did ask them landed in really wonderful spots, as you just described. And it goes the same way with SEL. We have districts using the Thoughtexchange platform to say, what's making you stressed at school? Full stop. No fancy assumptions, no list of Likert style questions. And we've done that today. You can't steal something that's given away for free. The purpose of what we're doing here, as I mentioned at the top, was to challenge and inspire and lean into courageous conversations. And we have a way to do that. I want to introduce Kai Kafferson, who's our colleague here working closely with Dennis and I, to tell you about some sessions that we've got upcoming.
Thanks for that, Andy. So to help you folks in your next steps of actually having these conversations, we are running a masterclass that digs in a little bit deeper to actually the nuances and logistics of how to launch exchanges, both regarding anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then the multiple themes that actually fall from that. So on November 23rd, we have our next masterclass, and that's going to be at 12 o'clock Pacific and then 3 o'clock Eastern. And this is going to be a great chance to get some support and to brainstorm how to launch the exchange, and then actually how to action the results and dig into them a little bit deeper. And you can see there is a link for this in the chat as well.
Thank you so much, Kai. Thank you all very much for being here. Dr. Carpenter, the final word is yours.
Thank you all. Dr. Bedell, Dr. Phyall, your expertise and sharing with us, very, very powerful. Give it up for our 50+ participants who really leaned into the conversation as well. We're going to keep this equity series going. We hope to see you all soon. Kasiri and Ngera, see you next time.